Hey guys, Laura from Teal House Farm here, and today I'm here to answer your canning questions. So you all asked some awesome questions on Facebook and on our YouTube community post, and I was actually really surprised by the variety and the number of questions we got about canning, and that includes pressure canning and water bath canning. And so I'm going to do my best. I picked some of the ones that we saw reoccurring and some of the ones that I thought, that's a question when I was learning how to can that I wish somebody would have just answered for me, and we're going to try to answer them all. If you're interested in learning about canning different things, I can all the time, and I have lots of videos. You can check down the playlist below. I'll link it in the description, and you can see a lot of the different things we can, and that is not everything. There is more stuff coming all of the time because we are always adding to our pantry and trying to create videos for you. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first question we got a couple of times. So one person who asked it was Ellison here, and she asked, pressure versus water bath, question mark. So basically there's two types of canning out there. There is pressure canning where you need the big pressure canner, and there is also water bath canning where you need either a water bath canner, which has a nice lift cage inside, or you need a really big stock pot with a towel on the bottom. You don't want the jar sitting directly on the metal of the canner because they could get too hot and explode. Water bath versus pressure canning, what is the difference? Well, first off, the type of canner you use is different. A water bath canner is a boiling water canner. So we're gonna fill this all the way up with water. It's gonna cover all of the jars all the way. We're gonna bring the water to a rolling boil and then start our timer and then boil the jars. That's called processing the jars. Boil the jars for however long the process time is, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. And when the time is off, we turn off the heat. And once the water has cooled down a bit to lukewarm, you can go ahead and lift the jars out. Water bath canning is only allowed for high acid foods. So that's things like your jellies, canning applesauces, things like that. It is not okay for most vegetables, and it is never okay for meats. Okay, high acid foods are not a good environment for the growth of bacteria like botulism, which is what makes people really sick from improperly processed home canned foods. And so you don't need the giant pressure canner, which is going to bake and cook all that food at like 11 pounds pressure for 90 minutes. Okay, for everything else, you need a pressure canner. You want to use a pressure canner, please. I know you can watch videos and people say, oh, look, I used my pressure cooker that's not rated for canning. Please don't do that, okay? You can disagree with me in the comments all you want, but I'm going to say there is a difference. You need the pressure canner, okay? Please, just, if you're new to this, don't listen to those people with other kind of videos just when you're getting started. You can decide for yourself later when you're comfortable and know what you're doing. Please buy a pressure canner and keep yourself safe, please. Anyway, pressure canners for everything else. And you can pressure can about anything. There are some rules that you can really get into, but really, quite a lot of food can be made shelf stable with a pressure canner. Okay, next question. Rebecca asks, how do I not blow myself up? Because when I hear words like pressure, I just assume I'm too dumb to do it safely. Well, that's how I felt, and that's why it took me way longer than it should have to get started pressure canning. Pressure canning sounds really dangerous, and I'm sure everybody can tell me a story about so-and-so's grandmother whose pressure canner exploded and blew a hole through their roof. And most accidents are avoidable for two reasons. One, you need to make sure that you are maintaining your canner according to the instructions in your manual. So when you get your canner, your manual is going to be like this thick. It's going to have recipes and stuff in it, but like one of the first pages is going to be safety and how to maintain your canner safely. For example, this canner has a gasket. It's a rubber piece of rubber here. That's what seals. And every time before I can, I check the gasket to make sure that there are no nicks, that it's still nice and flexible, and it's not malformed in any way or not all of a sudden hard and brittle. And I also have to check my vent, which is this hole right here. I'll hold it up to a really bright light and look through the back side and make sure I can see the light through. And that makes sure that this vent is not clogged, because this vent is clogged, I could build up a dangerous amount of pressure, which would eventually blow the top off the canner. Canners can only get so much pressure in them before the metal gives way. So there are other safety, there's ways that you store them and make sure that you clean them correctly. It's all in there. If you follow the list and follow your safety protocol procedures, every time. You will be safe, okay? Also, you want to make sure that you don't get antsy. When your canner is done, you never open it until it's all the way back down to 0 and has cooled down a bit, okay? Don't get in a hurry and try to wedge it open. Even 2 pounds pressure, that's a lot of pressure, and it's going to blow the top right off if somehow you manage to wedge it open, okay? People get hurt because people do dumb things like trying to open their canner early, not paying attention to the pressure valve and letting it get way too high, or not doing their safety checks to make sure that their canner is safe to use. You will be very safe and be very successful canning if you just take the time to follow your safety procedures. Emily asks, what do you do if your garden doesn't produce enough tomatoes one time to can? Do you freeze them until you have enough? How do you prep tomatoes to freeze them? This is a great question. I love talking about tomatoes because tomatoes is kind of one of those foods almost everybody grows and almost everybody wants to can. And so chances are, unless you're growing a giant garden, you're not going to have enough all at one time. Tomatoes are super easy though. Just rinse them off, pop the blossom off the top, and slide them in a bag and put them in the freezer. Just like that. I save old bread bags during the year that we use when we buy loaved bread or tortillas or anything like that. And that's what I put the tomatoes in. So I'm not buying Ziploc bags. And I just keep them in the freezer, keep throwing tomatoes in there as I pick them. And then sometime in the fall when life is less busy because the garden season is over, I pull out all the tomatoes and I let them defrost. And as they defrost, the skins actually peel off super easy because one of the steps to making sauce is to peel the tomatoes. And they just slide right off as it defrosts, and then we're ready to go ahead and make spaghetti sauce. And we can do it at that point with like 50 pounds of tomatoes that I've collected all year. So a lot of vegetables, you do need to can right away, but there are some like tomatoes where you can kind of just put them aside, especially in the freezer, until you are ready to can them. And that allows you to focus on the things that need to be put up right away, and then use your time that you have in the fall and the winter when things aren't quite so busy to get canning done that could be saved for later. Tess asks, is it better to get a canner with no gasket as the price differences are considerable? I have to preserve my garden's harvest somehow, so I need to buy one, but the upfront cost feels prohibitive. Is it really worth it? Well, I've actually never owned a canner without a gasket. So this is the gasket she's talking about. It's this rubber piece inside. And there are brands, including the All-American canner, that are completely metal. There is no rubber, no plastic, nothing like that. All metal. They are expensive. They are much more expensive than I can buy. Even with the amount of canning I do, I just can't put that kind of money down on a canner. I think they're between $400 and $500, but the price changes all the time depending on the season. They could be much more expensive than that right now. I have 2 canners. They both have a gasket. This is my favorite one. This is a Presto 23 quart. I'll link it below. The only reason I like it better than my other canner is because it's American made, which means if you need to find a replacement part, like when it's time to replace that gasket because it's got a nick in it, I can just call them up. I think they're in Michigan, and they'll send me one. I've had them send me a replacement gauge before when my gauge was broken accidentally by one of my children dropping the lid really hard. And I had a new gauge within 3 days. I also have a Teal, which I'll also link below because it's the same price point. They're both between $130 and $150, and it's the same size. But the difference is the Teal is not made in America, and I did need a replacement part for it, and it took me almost 9 months to get the replacement part because first I had to find the company that made the replacement parts, and then they sent me the wrong part from China, which took like 2 months, and then 2 months to send it back. And then there was processing time, and then finally they sent me the correct replacement part. I missed like a whole canning season with that canner because the amount of time it took me to get a replacement part. So, do you need a canner with a gasket? No. People do like canners with the gaskets though because they don't ever really need replacements. And they kind of last forever. And there is just a very small percentage less likely that you'll have an explosion accident because you don't have the rubber gasket. But again, like I said, if you are monitoring your gasket and taking care of your canner appropriately, you don't need to worry about that. Gasket problems happen when people get in a hurry or when people don't do their safety checks. Okay, Joyce asks, can the jelly-sized jars be used for pressure canning? Being single, it would be nice to have a few smaller jars of meats I don't eat often, like crumbled sausage. The answer is yes, you can. So pressure canning meats, for example, this is some ham that I've cubed up and pressure canned in ham broth for, let's see, sometimes I fry it up with a little bit of brown sugar, sometimes I fry it up like breakfast ham, sometimes I add it in cheesy potato casserole, lots of options. But when you pressure can ham, usually when you are looking at the recipes online, I recommend looking at the National Center for Home Food Preservation for all of their recipes for canning about anything that you can think of. It's a great scientific, evidence-based canning recommendations. Whenever you can meats, it almost always refers to them as pints or quarts, because the vast majority of people who are going to spend the time in canning meats are going to want them in pints or quarts. But if you really want a smaller jar, this is a jelly-sized half pint. These are still mason jars. They're still safe to use in your pressure canner. Okay, I canned these peppers in the pressure canner in these half pint jars. So you absolutely can do it. You might have trouble finding evidence-based numbers as far as how long to can it for. And so what I would encourage you to do is to be extra cautious and do the time listed on pint jars, which is 75 minutes for a meat. It probably is longer than it's needed. It's obviously a smaller jar, but because there probably isn't an evidence-based number for most meats, because again, most people don't can them in the small jars, it would be a guess as to how long is safe. So I would go with what we know is safe for a larger jar, and then it's guaranteed to be safe for a smaller jar. Okay, Adrian and several of you asked something along the lines of how to start small and with limited supplies. So what do you absolutely need to can? Okay, gained a helper. Anyway, what you need to decide first is pressure canning or water bath canning. I'd recommend, again, if you're growing a garden anyway, you're probably going to want the pressure canner because most of the foods in your garden are going to be vegetables, which are low acid. They're going to need to be pressure canned. And you, by the way, can water bath can in a pressure canner, but you cannot pressure can in a water bath canner. Anyway, what do you absolutely need? Okay, you need your canner. This is going to be your largest investment here. Again, somewhere between $130 and $150 is going to get you set up with a canner that's large enough for your time. So this is a 23 quart. That doesn't mean if it's 23 quart jars. That's the entire liquid volume. You need jars. You want to hold the jar? And they have to be mason jars. Mason jars, so there's their ball, anchor glass. You can buy them on the shelf at Walmart, pretty much any farm store. You can buy them online on Amazon. I have gotten so many mason jars just for free when people know that you can. People buy mason jars for weddings, for decorations for baby showers, and then they're like, what am I going to do with these 20 jars? I don't really need them. Let people know you can. You will get lots of jars. You can also find them at yard sales. Really, mason jars are very durable. You just want to check, make sure there's no cracks, make sure there's no nicks if you run your finger along the rim, and then really they're going to be safe to use. You need your jar. You're going to need a ring. If you buy new jars, it does come with a ring on it. And you will need lids. Box of lids is about $1.25 for the regular mouth lids. Again, if you bought a new jar, it'll come with the lids on it. But yeah, honestly, if you had nothing else, you could start canning with just those things. Now, things that make your life a little easier and make it less likely that you're going to burn your sensitive little fingies while you're trying to can. As a wide mouth funnel, which allows you to put chunky things into the jar. And some jar lifters. Allows you to get those hot jars in and out of the canners without burning your fingers accidentally. So yeah, that's really it though. You don't need a lot of fancy stuff. There is all sorts of fancy stuff. There's reusable lids. There's really cool looking jars. As long as it's a mason jar, you can use it, whether it's a fancy colored or like designed one, or if it's just plain Jane like this. Just make sure it's a true mason jar. It'll say so on the box. And that's really all you need. You don't have to go crazy, okay? Okay, Brenda asked, and this is a good question, preparing the jars. Now, about every canning video that you will watch, the person presenting the video kind of assumes you have a basic knowledge. And I found when I was trying to learn how to can different things that they kept talking about preparing the jars, but nobody ever actually told me what that meant. So I'm going to tell you what that means. You never want to can in a cold jar. You never want to can in a jar that's not perfectly clean, okay? So preparing the jar is getting the jar ready to be filled with your hot whatever that is going to go into your hot canner, okay? So what you do is you take your mason jar, you wash it in hot soapy water, okay? You rinse it out, and you are going to have to sanitize it. So sanitizing it A lot of people will put these in a really big pot on the stove and bring it to a boil for 10 minutes. And then they'll turn the stove off and they're just going to leave the jars in the hot water until they're ready to fill it. And that keeps the jars nice and warm for being filled. Again, never fill a cold jar. It'll probably explode on you. And it might not explode until after you get it out of the canner, which could really hurt you with the hot liquid inside. Okay, now, if you're like me and you have a small stove, I cannot fit the really big pot to boil the jars in my canner on there at the same time. So what I do, and if you're a purist, you can cover your ears, but I wash the jars in hot soapy water, and then I stick them in the oven on 225 for 20 minutes to sanitize them. Now, people will tell you that you might destroy the integrity of your jars with the dry heat. I have not found that to be true. I have canned literally thousands of jars at this point in my life, and I've only ever had one explode. And I've reused my jars again and again and again and again and again. So it's really up to you what you're comfortable with. I am going to let you know that that method is not the recommended one because there really isn't enough data to say whether the dry heat damages the jars. Now, the easiest way to prepare your jars is to have your dishwasher do all of that work for you. I don't have a dishwasher, but if you're fortunate to have one, just put your jars in the dishwasher, run your dishwasher. And when you're ready to load them, that's when you open the door of the dishwasher and all the steam comes out and your nice, hot, clean, and sterilized jars are ready to be filled. The lids, you do the same thing, wash them in hot soapy water, and then you're just going to put them in a pan with a little bit of water, bring the water to a boil, and then turn it off, and it keeps them hot. That helps soften the wax that's on the inside of the rings to help make sure you get a really good seal. You do not have to sanitize your lids if you are pressure canning, because pressure canning is going to kind of do that for you, but you want to make sure that they are clean and warm enough that the wax has softened. You do need to sanitize them, which means boil them if you're going to do water bath canning, because it's not as powerful at killing off the bacteria. Okay, and the last question I'm going to answer today is from Tammy. She said, supplies needed to start, done that. Cost of initial investment, if you just go with the minimum number of supplies, it's probably going to be about $175, depending where you get your canning jars. Again, if you can get them all for free, then your initial investment is more like $150 or even less. And needed time for canning process. Now that's the big one. Canning is not quick. There's nothing about canning that's quick. You need time to prepare the food for canning, however it's being canned. For example, let's see here. For example, this is cranberry sauce that I made at Thanksgiving, and I canned a bunch of it because Sam loves cranberry sauce all times of the year. Okay, so I had to make the cranberry sauce. That itself took like an hour. And then I had to prepare all the jars. I had to fill the jars. I had to process them in the canner. And then I had to wait for the canner to cool all the way off and get the jars out. So it depends what you're canning, but you're at least a couple hours in, even with the simplest things. Sometimes some things, like meats, can be an all-day process. I canned sausage patties for breakfast. And after making them browning, 200 patties, filling all the jars and processing that many jars, it takes all day because the canner has to heat up every time, start the timer for 90 minutes for quart jars of meat, let it cool all the way down and lose all of its pressure, and then repeat. So it can be a time-consuming process. But for me, I really think it's worth it. I'm feeding a large family. I can take foods that are normally not shelf stable and make them shelf stable for years. And I can provide my family really good quality foods all year round because I can provide organic foods from my garden or meats that we raise ourselves. And I can be giving it to them any time of the year. I have control over the foods that are in my pantry, and I don't have to worry about the electricity going out and ruining or losing thousands of pounds of whatever that was in a freezer or in a refrigerator. That is a rundown of answering your canning questions. Thanks so much for asking such great questions. I really appreciate it. We will see you all soon, and we will have lots of new canning videos coming up here, probably in about a month, because the garden is hopping. That's not water. That's cranberry sauce. You want to tell everyone bye, and we'll go get you a drink? Yeah. Okay. Say bye. Bye. See you next time.